Today I'm taking the first step in turning my 350Z into a pro level drift car. Okay, maybe pro-am. Pro's kind of a far stretch, but we're gonna get there. The off season has officially started, which means it's time to tear this thing apart because we've got a lot of work to do to make it way more competitive for next year. Now, when I say tear this thing apart, I don't just mean I'm pulling the engine and transmission out. I mean I am taking everything out. We are starting over and building this car the way I've wanted to since day one. Obviously, we've been doing things in stages. I wasn't just gonna go full race car right off the rip, but now it's that time. So let's get to work. So one of the main goals with kind of redoing everything is really simplifying the chassis harness on the car itself. Now, I've been using a stock harness for absolutely everything, which makes sense, we have a stock motor, but I've tried my best to simplify it. Now, I haven't cut everything out, but I've done a lot of cutting the harness open and taping things up and zip tying it up out of the way, so it at least looked clean and there wasn't a ton of excess stuff out of the way. But let me just give you an example. We're in the trunk of the car here. The only wiring I need back here is for the taillights. That's it. Nothing else exists back here. Obviously the battery, but aside from that, like chassis harness wise, it's just the taillights. This is how many wires power the taillights on a factory harness. This is the whole harness. These are the taillight plugs. You've got everything else for all kinds of nonsense. Really should only need about 4 wires back here, not the 100 that are in that harness right there. So we're getting rid of that. All right, so I'm working on getting all the wiring out, and I figured I would show you guys the quickest way to get the wiring out of the way so you can pull the motor, and that is not pulling the harness off the engine like you saw me do when we swapped the motor. I did that because the harness was staying in the car and we were just replacing the motor, so that makes more sense. But it takes way longer because you have to get every single little plug for the injectors and the coil packs and all the sensors and everything else. But if you're pulling the whole drivetrain out like we are now, all you have to do is unclip about 3 connectors and then 2 big ones that go to the ECU, and you can pull the whole engine harness out of the car and take everything out all at once. Now, obviously I got a head start here because my whole windshield wiper cowl is out, and it's this big harness right here that runs through this rubber grommet that goes into your passenger like footwell area. These 3 connectors connect to these 3 plugs. This is normally clipped on the inner thing here. So this is where your battery lives, in case you didn't figure that out. But then we'll just follow these wires in the car where they come in, connect to our ECU, and there's one other little box behind the ECU that I still have to get out of the way. I have everything zip tied up to the cage. So we'll get all this unplugged out of the way, start pulling all the wires through, and then we got to get this dash out. And after you pull this through, this is what you're left with. So there's your ECU plug, that other one I was talking about, some random ground, the grommet that it came through, and those 3 connectors we took off. So this can just lay over the motor, and then when we pull it, we're gonna leave the entire engine harness connected. All right, got a little sidetracked from prepping the engine to pull and really wanted to finish up the wiring harness inside the car. I started on that a little bit earlier, and I just pulled all of it out. I mean, every single wire. And this is what we're left with. It's a lot of wires here. Any guesses on what all that weighs? Okay, zeroed it out with the trash can empty. Total weight is... what the heck? Total weight is 20.1. 20 pounds of wiring, and that's taillights to firewall. That doesn't include anything in the front of the car, and there is quite a bit of wiring up there. And I don't mean for the engine, right? That's its own harness. I mean the chassis harness. We've still got all the wiring for the headlights, which is way more than it needs to be. All the factory airbag wiring is still in the front. The wiring for the fans, the accessory stuff like air conditioning, all the wires that connected to the ABS module that's not even in the car anymore. There's still a bunch of little harnesses and sub harnesses and stuff that we don't need. So it'll be really interesting to see just how much weight we're able to save by completely stripping this thing down to nothing and building a more stripped down race car style chassis harness. We'll have to wait until we actually build that thing to see the real weight differences, but it should be pretty cool to see. One thing I forgot to mention, even though we are replacing pretty much the entire chassis harness, we don't really need any of the factory wiring. What we do need is a few factory connectors for stuff that we're gonna retain. A good example being the factory taillights, and we need them to work, meaning I need brake lights, which means I need the factory brake light switch that lives on the pedal. It wouldn't make sense to get rid of a switch that already works just to wire in my own connector and my own thing. So all I did there was leave the factory switch with the plugs plugged in. I cut the wires about 6 inches back so we have a nice pigtail to work with. So we can splice into that and run the new harness to the factory stuff so that will all still work.
Easy as that. Like I said, just left a little bit of slack, so we've got both of our connectors there. One of these we don't need, but I don't remember which one's which, so I figured it was easier just to cut it off. That way we can get the wires out of here, and I'll figure out which sensor we actually need later.
So I decided to tackle the front half of the chassis harness, everything that controls all the headlights and all the junk up there. And that led me to this point. We might as well just pull the motor now. You guys have seen me pull enough VQs, right? We can just do one of those like YouTube magic, snap your finger things. No? Okay. Just about every time I've pulled this drivetrain, I've completely forgot about the shifter and shifter linkage. That's exactly what just happened. Took it off. Let's get back to the montage. Well, now that that's out of the way, I guess we can get back to pulling the wiring harness out, which was the original goal. I finally got the wiring harness that I wanted out. It was buried behind the false firewall. It went in the car, to the left, to the right. That's the one that controls the headlights, all the airbag stuff in the front, the electric fans, the air conditioning, the ABS, the fuse box that lives by the battery, and a bunch of other stuff. It's a huge wiring harness, and I was only using about 20% of it, so I am so happy to get rid of the thing. We'll have to get it on the scales and see how much it weighs, because it's a lot of wires. I mean, this is a lot. Okay, I've got to know. 15.9, let's call it 16 pounds, plus the 20 pounds from the interior harness. We're at 36 pounds of wiring, not including the engine harness. I'm pretty confident we can get this down to way, way, way less. Now, am I gonna feel, let's say 20 pounds weight savings just from the wiring? Probably not, but every little bit counts, and more than anything, it's gonna be way easier to work on, way more serviceable. If I do ever have issues with the wiring, it's gonna be way easier to track down those issues. It's more for all of those reasons, and the weight savings is just an added benefit. But the pile of wires and other things I'm not gonna use has definitely grown. Pretty crazy how much extra space is in here now. I mean, this is where all of that stuff lived. There was fuse box, obviously the battery, and then that harness that I was talking about went down there. ABS module, just so much extra stuff. It's all gonna be gone. And I'm really thinking about removing this false firewall to open the whole thing up. Probably not in this video, but I think that's gonna happen. And this is how we're leaving off the interior for now. Not 100% done, but pretty close. Let me show you. Got pretty much every wire pulled out of there. Now I still want to take the headlight and windshield wiper stock off the column, and probably the key as well. I've got to make a mount for the hydro reservoir, and we're going to be redoing the wiring for my battery relocation, kill switch, and all that. But a whole lot cleaner, a lot more room to work with. I'm excited.
Okay, let's talk about the plans for this thing. Obviously, we're doing an engine swap. Now, if you paid close attention to the last video where I was tearing the blown up motor down, you'll see I hinted at a new motor coming for this thing. That's right, I've already got something. It's in the works. I've been collecting parts for the new engine, for the whole swap, for a few months now, and I am so excited to get into it. I'm not going to give away all the details, but it is not going to be another VQ. It's not even going to be another 6-cylinder. That should probably answer your questions right there. But I am just so hyped to get some more power in this thing and to show up next year with a way more capable car. Before we put the new motor in this thing, I've got some work to do. I really want to clean up the engine bay, probably tear out this false firewall, maybe cut the frame rails off and do a tube front. And the new engine itself needs some work because we're not throwing a stock motor in this thing. So we've got a little bit of a build to do on that. Let me know how much of that you guys want to see. Building the new motor, doing the fab work on this, doing some maintenance, and definitely some cosmetic work on this thing. That's going to be a wrap on this video. I hope you guys are excited as I am to see some big changes for the Z. I'm going to stop talking because I've got some work to do, and I know this season is going to sneak up on me real fast. It's only a couple months away, and while that may feel like a long time, with this much work ahead of me, I know it's going to come fast. Give this video a thumbs up if you guys are excited to see what's to come, and of course, I will catch you in the next one.